Hey guys, it's the Gold Baron, and I am doing a valve adjustment on my 2008 Yamaha R6. I previously had a 2006 Yamaha R6, and I want this video to give you guys information about the valve adjustment, the cam chain tensioner, any sort of idle issues when it's cold or when you let in the clutch, and just give a lot of information about that and help you guys out, because I think this is a very common problem and issue with the Yamaha R6. And I think I'm a lot more familiar with it and can give a lot of relevant information about it. So I used to have a black 2006 Yamaha R6, and I had to do a valve adjustment twice on it. And both times the exhaust side was way out of spec, and the first time I did it, the intake side was almost all out of spec as well. And that led to it dying when I pulled in the clutch, coming to a stop, especially more when it was cold or below 160 degrees. It would idle pretty rough. It sounded a little more rough, especially when it was cold. It would sometimes die when you gave it throttle and let off when it was cold, when it was below 160 degrees. And the problem would be more consistent when it was cold outside. But all of that was due to the valves, not the idle set screws, not anything else on the bike that needed to be adjusted. It was only the valves. And in this video, I just want to give some information of how to check the valves, how to adjust the valves, and lots of other things about that. So, from what I know, the 2006 and 2007 Yamaha R6s have a lot more issues with their valves going out quicker than the 2008s and up. So the 2006 and 2007 valves seem to elongate or wear a lot faster and need valve adjustments more frequently than the 2008s and up. As an example, when I first bought my 2006 R6, it was in really good shape, really good condition, and when I would give it throttle, when it was below 160 degrees, it would sometimes die. And that was due to the valves being out of spec, mostly the exhaust side, because those go out of spec quicker. So that was at 17,000 miles. Now, it has not happened on this bike. This bike does not do it. It is a 2008 R6 with 17,000 miles, the same as my black one, but it does not do that. And I just checked all the valves, and on the exhaust side, it's supposed to be between 0.16 and 0.23 millimeters. Intake side is 0.12, 0.19. All of the intake side is in spec. All of the exhaust side is out of spec, but just barely, by about 0.01 to 0.03 on all this side. So I really don't think this is going to cause an issue. It will cause it to run a little bit rough, but when I did my first valve adjustment on my black 2006 R6, I couldn't even get feeler gauges in the entire exhaust side except for maybe two. It was really bad, very bad. Anyway, another quick thing I'd like to point out is the cam chain tensioner on these bikes, which I have two of them over here. So this is from a 2006, 2007 R6. And if you notice, there's a bit of a difference between this is the old one, this is the new one. And I believe maybe 2013 or 14, at some point, they switched to a different one. I think the 2008 has the newer one. You can see the difference in them. But anyway, another issue I had with my 2006 R6 is every once in a while, occasionally, I would turn on the bike when it was cold, and I could hear the cam chain rattling for 1 to 6 seconds. Sometimes it would do it, sometimes it wouldn't do it. It was like 1 in 5 times when I would start the bike cold, it would do it. And it was the cam chain tensioner. I don't think it was the valves, it wasn't some idle adjustment, it was a cam chain tensioner. And so what I did was I went on the Yamaha parts website and ordered the new part number, and it looks like that one, not the older one, and replace it with the Yamaha cam chain tensioner, and I never had an issue since then. It never rattled again, and it fixed the problem. You could go with a manual cam chain tensioner. I would recommend, because it fixed my problem, and it's probably better to have some sort of play in the cam chain tensioner. I mean, that's how Yamaha designed it, to go with the OEM one, because it can extend in and out. So I would recommend doing that, although it is a little more expensive, between $80 to $120. It fixed my problem, and I would recommend that over a manual cam chain tensioner, although I think a manual one would fix it as well. So if you have rattling or anything like that, I know on this bike, I actually ordered one for this one because after my oil change, which may be because it was still getting oil to the rest of the engine, I would give it some revs and I could hear the cam chain rattling a bit. So I ordered a new cam chain tensioner, because 99% of the time that's the issue, and you don't want to run the bike with it when it's doing that. But anyway, so obviously on the 2006-2007 R6s, the valves give out much more faster than the 2008s and up, and I can see that. I have proof of that right now. I mean, yes, my exhaust side is out on this 08, but it's so much better, and it hasn't had any idle issues when I rev it. So that's something to note about the 2006 and 2007 R6s, is if you get one of those, you're going to have to expect to replace the exhaust valves and maybe the intake valves around 40 to 60,000 miles. And you have to keep up with your valves. I even had a buddy that had a 2007 R6 with the exact same issue. The valves were never adjusted and it dropped the valve. So what happens is the valves extend over time, because the valves kind of look like this. And on the top of these is this little shim, right? And this is the shim you adjust the valves with. So when this extends and wears, you have to make this shim smaller and smaller, you know, as it wears. So that's what I'm doing when you do a valve adjustment, is when it's out of spec, you put a smaller shim in to get it between this range and make it, you know, so this is 0.15, so I put in a thinner shim, so I'm going to see what shim is in there when I disassemble it, and then put in a thinner shim, and that's how you adjust the valves on these. The intake side, they're all within spec. I might adjust this one because it's, or these three because they're close to being out of spec, and then leave the rest. But so honestly, this is my third valve adjustment. I am pretty mechanically minded, but I think anyone could really do it if they have enough time and they know how to work on bikes, or at least can take their time. So I mean, the biggest thing is you got to take off your air box, your fairings. You have to pull the radiator forward, where there's two bolts on either side and there's one underneath. Pull the radiator forward, take off all your plastics, remove the air box, and you know, there's screws around the air box, and then once you get inside here, there's screws, those screws around there that you can take off, and there's some tubes and wires you unplug, pull that off, and then the throttle bodies, you unscrew these, and then take off the throttle bodies, pull this cover forward, take out the spark coils, these, then all of these screws you take off, and the valve cover comes off, and that's all pretty straightforward. And this is the valves right here. And so to check the valves, just download a service manual, all right? They have everything on how to do this. Usually I found free service manual PDFs for the 2006, 2007, and 2008 R6 on how to check your valves for those. Check the valves, just read the service manual. You turn this clockwise and go to the top dead center mark. Just read the service manual again. And then you put your shims in there. When it turns to the right rotations, there's two valves on each, and then you turn it and then check the valves. You slide the thing in, and you slide the feeler gauges and test, you know, where they're at. And if they're out of spec, then you unscrew all these in a certain order. Again, it'll tell you in the user or the service manual, and you unscrew them all slightly, and then go back and unscrew them in like a crisscross pattern. That way you don't damage the cam when you're taking these out. And then you put in the new shims, and then you put everything back together and get the cam chain. I like to mark the cam chain to make sure everything's lined up and held in place, and then that will fix your valves. And then everything else is pretty straightforward. But yeah, if you have idling issues, if it idles rough, if it dies when you pull in the clutch, that's your problem. It's not. Honestly, I tried adjusting these little screws, which are like have something to do with the idle. Honestly, just leave them. If you're having issues with it dying, it's because of your valves, and this might help it slightly, but it won't fix the problem, which is your valves. So I just wouldn't adjust these, because you don't really need to, those set screws for the idle. Anyway, that's an update, and I'm hoping, because these aren't as out of spec as the 2006 one, that this bike will last a lot longer and that the valves will be better, because right now it seems like that's the case.